Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Game Changer. I'm Mariam Zia. In today's program, we will dive deep into the heart of one of the most important and significant regional organization, the Arab League. Arab League was formed in 1945 and the purpose was to connect different Arab states, and the purpose was to aim for regional issues and conflicts of these areas. And recently we know that Arab League concluded its 32nd summit and Jeddah Declaration was adopted in this summit. And this was a historic summit because of the timing is very significant, because we know that region is going through a lot of developments. In today's program, we will be discussing and exploring these developments. And this summit was also significant because in this summit, after a decade, Syria was also invited, and Syrian president also participated in this summit. So in today's program, we will be discussing this historic Arab League summit and the decisions taken at this summit, what these decisions mean for the region and beyond, and how these decisions are going to be a game changer for Arab states and the region. To discuss this and more, I'm joined in the studios by Mr. Hamza Rifat, who is expert foreign affairs and columnist with Al Maideen. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
We are also joined by Mr. Shehjar Khan, who is expert in international affairs. Welcome to the program. And we're joined online by Dr. Hassan Javed, who is economist and expert in international affairs. A very warm welcome to you all in the program. So let me start with you, Mr. Hamza. Of course, when we talk about this significant Arab League summit, and how do you see particularly this Jeddah Declaration that was adopted at the end of this summit? What are some of the key significant points of this summit, and what you see? What do you see the significance of the timing of this summit?
I think the summit is extremely important, Mariam, because of a number of different reasons. First of all, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has been simmering for quite some time. We've just had raids take place within Palestinian refugee camps. We talk about the Balata refugee camp for that matter. So Israeli aggression, particularly with the far-right government in power, is knowing no bounds. So it's very, very important to have a regional solution to the entire crisis and a blueprint to try and make sure that conflict resolution can take place. So when you talk about the timing and the kind of conflicts that are simmering in the region, it is extremely strategically significant in that regard. The Jeddah Declaration also speaks about a regional solution to all outstanding disputes within the Middle East. We're talking about conflicts in Lebanon, we're talking about conflicts in North Africa, we're also talking about conflicts within the Arab world. We're talking about Yemen as well, which by many accounts is one of the worst humanitarian disasters ever. So when we talk about how the Arab League Summit and the Jeddah Declaration has come about, it basically highlights the mechanisms through which we can actually resolve these conflicts and make sure that any solution cannot be imposed on the Arab world. It has to be very indigenous in its approach. So I think with regard to how the orientation actually takes place, it's very important to understand that each of the tenets have to be implemented to a large extent to make sure that they do have a meaningful impact. So the timing is important because if you read the Jeddah Declaration, it has called out Israeli aggression in quite a few of its clauses. So Israeli aggression taking place requires the Arab League to actually come together, and that's where the heartling sign basically is.
Of course. Mr. Shehjar, when we talk about this important declaration, what's your take on Jeddah Declaration, and how do you see the issues that were discussed in this summit?
So Mariam, this gathering was the most significant gathering of Arab leaders since the peace brokered between China, by China between
Saudi Iran approach.
So in the backdrop of this very significant event, this is the first time all the 22 Arab states are like getting together. And as Hamza mentioned, the key agenda that was like basically discussed was the impending or pending crises in terms of like economics, in terms of conflict that are like there, and also they were all like discussed in great detail. One of the key takeaways from this conference that I basically see is this emerging role of Saudi Arabia as a peace broker in the region. So that was like one of the most significant things that I basically observed, that Saudi, now that it's like in the process of resolving all of its pending issues with Iran, now once Bashar al-Assad was invited, Syria has rejoined the Arab League. So these are very significant developments that are emerging from this Arab League conference. And again, the declaration is also very significant. It talks in detail about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. I personally don't think it should be called a conflict, because I think that's a very sanitized way of basically describing occupation by the Israeli government, a brutal occupation of Palestinian people. So I think we should move away from using these sanitized ways of describing this brutal occupation.
Of course.
Other than that, the Yemeni issue, which was at the heart of the whole Arab, Iran conflict, that's on the way of being resolved, and the emergence of Saudi Arabia as a regional peace broker.
Right, of course. Dr. Hassan, when we talk about Arab League, of course we know that this regional organization was founded back in 1945. How do you see this organization has evolved over years, and what has it done for the Arab countries, and how do you see its role evolved over time, especially when we talk about this in the backdrop of Jeddah Declaration?
See, before that, it was not that much active in any way possible. As I told you, there are a number of issues I have earlier telling you about, from the Israel, from the Palestine, from the Jordanian issue, from the Syria issue, from the Libya issue. They are not taking the Saudis lead or Arab League in a serious matter. But when we talk about the bloc also voice rejected foreign interference, that's mean it is emergence of the new wave, which is called rejection of the foreign interference in the Arab countries in internal affair. That is the whole of the communique is also stressed the importance of the intensify effort to achieve the comprehensive and just settlement of the Palestine issue based on two-state solution as per UN Security Council Resolution 242. And 242 resolution is very much important, and in 2002 Arab Peace Initiative to ensure the establishment of the independent Palestine state based on 1967 border with the East Jerusalem and its capital. So now the need of the protection of the Muslim site in Jerusalem, which is very much important. Then one is one of the outcome of the summit that the Arab people are aspired to, waiting for the activation of the Arab common market and greater Arab free trade area to unify custom tariff that they never gave us. The whole Western power are joined together, the Eurasian belts are together, but they never give the Arab League to support their tariff rate. They are never in the position to stick on their level. So now what are the various level in the social development? They are proposing the Arab Space Corporation, which is very much important. They are not just telling that we need a peace. They are telling that now we are into the market and we were going to do the Arab Space Corporation, sustainability in Arab agriculture development. And I'm telling you, Arab is very much focused on the food security and food insecurity. They are going to have the green belt over on the desert areas. So improving the production of the preservance in the natural resources, and more on there is a sustaining the Arab passes and raising the rate of the percentage the inter-Arab trade. So one of the most urgent issues that concern the Arabs in water resource management in the region, that is also under the declaration, because West never faced this problem, because Arab has the water scarcity problem, and as several countries suffer from the water scarcity, and particularly Egypt, Syria, Iraq, Jordan, and the occupied Palestinian territories. So the main initiative of the Arab Declaration is now the presidency of the Arab Summit, which was handed over earlier by the Algeria. The kingdom will strengthen the joint Arab action in a various culture, economic, and social environmental
we will be discussing more about joint Arab action later in the program. But Mr. Hamza, when we talk about this important summit that was held in Jeddah, how do you see Syria's involvement or participation in this summit after a decade, and how do you see the role of Arab League in this Syrian conflict?
I think, first of all, Syria has been isolated diplomatically, internationally, and economically for quite some time. And Bashar al-Assad's regime and the conflict that has actually been taking place, it's more of a proxy warfare between Iran and Saudi Arabia, as well as American interference and, of course, the Russians as well. I mean, peacekeeping deals have not necessarily worked. De-escalation zones have not worked. Washington's proposal, or the Obama doctrine of ensuring that regime change takes place, that has also not worked. So the best way to the best way to reach out to Syria is to make them part of the Arab League and to try and make sure that they can actually offer something constructive to the Bashar al-Assad regime. Syria's about 80% of its population is facing abject poverty. GDP growth rates have tanked. There's sanctions on the Bashar al-Assad regime, which has prevented governments from providing services to the local population. So it has been in a complete economic and political and military quagmire for quite some time. The Arab League's ability to reach out to Damascus tries and it brings about this change within this mindset within the Arab world that Syria has to be excluded. Bashar al-Assad's government is being treated as a legitimate peace stakeholder in any, you could say, conflict resolution proposal, whether it's going to be based on UN Security Council resolutions, whether it's based upon the Jeddah Declaration. It's now high time for Syria to be considered as a regional player. And I think that is where, the Arab League has taken a role which is very different from, the American approach of trying to make sure that regime change takes place. Because Mari, we've seen in the larger region that Gaddafi's regime was actually deposed in Libya, and you can see the domestic situation within Libya. You have Khalifa Haftar on one hand, and then you have other sectarian groups as well, and they're vying for influence. So the Arab League does not want the same sort of situation to transpire in Syria. So that is why Syria's inclusion after decades is a very welcoming sign for Arab unity and for peace and conflict resolution.
It is very welcoming sign for Arab unity, but when we look at the Western response to this development of inclusion of Syria in the summit, how do you see that the US as well as the Europe has responded to this invite sent to Syrian government?
Well, I think, the castigation which is being directed at Bashar al-Assad, there are 2 to 3 different layers to it. First of all, he's considered to be a reckless murderer. He's considered to be a human rights violator. He's considered to be, bombarding the opposition. But if you, if you take a look at the Syrian conflict deeply and analyze the different factors, it's not only Bashar al-Assad. There's so many different, if you look at the arms sales based upon various SIPRI reports, American and Saudi arms sales have, skyrocketed since the Syrian conflict has actually taken place. So I think that's where the Western narrative would always be, limited to Bashar al-Assad being this, this reckless murderer, as I earlier pointed out, and somebody who has a very oppressive regime. So that's why they would not be very welcoming towards that. But I don't think what Western criticism should not matter anymore, because the Arab League, which has historically been considered, I mean, Dr. Aslam pointed it out, it was more of a futile sort of exercise in general. It's not futile anymore, because the Jeddah Declaration does speak about ensuring that Syria is a legitimate stakeholder in the absence of American intervention. So obviously, I wouldn't really think that, Western criticism carries any sort of merit whatsoever. Any solution has to be regional.
Of course, any solution has to be regional, but we witness a humanitarian crisis going on when we talk about the situation in Syria. So how do you think that this Arab League is going to respond in future to alleviate the sufferings of the communities, local communities, or the citizens of Syria?
So Mariam, taking forward like Hamza's point, one of the key areas that were one of the key openings for peace that came about was after the devastating earthquake of earlier this year. So vast areas of Turkey and Syria were devastated because of this earthquake, and this was an opening for a lot of Arab states to basically come in and support the Syrian people. One aspect that we always keep on forgetting is the number of refugees that have emerged from this whole Syrian crisis, and they are in Lebanon, they are in Jordan, they are in Iraq, and all of these countries are economically not doing very well. So the pressure on these countries to resolve this conflict, and that pressure is now moving towards the rest of the Arab states as well. So a peaceful resolution of the Syrian crisis, bringing Syria back into the fold of the Arab leagues, and this will give an opportunity for the Arab nations, and by the Arab nations I in particularly focus more on the GCC countries, because they have the financial capital to basically move into Syria and start some sort of reconstruction, give the economy a boost, resolve this refugee crisis that is like expanding to Europe as well as the Arab League nations, and to basically end this conflict and like bring some sort of like stability in this region. And let's like not forget, even though the whole conflict between Iran and Saudi Arabia is like being resolved, this is a way for the GCC countries and the Arab League to basically move the Syrians away from the whole Iranian influence as well, and to resolve that conflict as well. So this is like linked to the whole, Saudi Iran
So what
issue
are
as
future
well.
prospects for that?
So like as soon as this, some sort of like economic stability is brought to Syria, and if, like this whole conflict can be resolved, the Russian influence in Syria, other than that, the Iranian influence in Syria, that can also be neutralized to some extent. And that will obviously give a lot of like, stability in the overall Middle East, which is like very required. One of the key other movements that like happened in this Arab League was the invitation to, Zelensky,
Of course.
who basically came and gave a 15-minute speech. Interesting dynamics, because Zelensky was basically, asking for support from the Arab League nations in the war against Russian war in Ukraine. And at the same time, Bashar al-Assad is also invited, who's been supported by the Russian government to keep his, government intact. So these are like very important visuals that are emerging, that emerged from the Arab League. Again, putting Saudi Arabia in driving seat when it comes to resolving regional conflicts.
Of course, optics are also very important when we talk about this summit. Dr. Hassan, when we talk about this declaration, of course, the recent escalation in Palestine, recent escalation of violence in Palestine is also very important, and it has garnered international attention as well. How do you see the role of Arab League when we talk about Israel-Palestine conflict?
So one of the most important agenda, as I earlier told you, that Washington and the Europe have been outspoken critique of the Arab League's decision to normalize relationship with the Assad regime. So they are they never focused on the Israel and Palestine issue, neither of the Muslim unity or neither of the Muslim countries. They just want us to be scattered in any way possible. So if I talk about the Israeli issue, so Israel-Palestine violence has been intensified for the month, with the frequent Israeli military raids and the settler violence in the West Bank aimed and spite of the Palestine attack on Israel. So since January, more than 140 Palestinians and at least 19 Israelis and foreigners have been killed in West Bank, Israel. So the violence has flared in the West Bank. There is an Israeli army has staged a repeated raid against the military, and that have often fled into the street clashes or the gun battles. So Gaza, if I talk about the Gaza, also saw 5 days of the cross-border fire between the Israeli and the militant group this month that killed the 33 Palestinians and 2 people in the Israelis. The worst violence since 3 days escalation in the August last year killed in 49 Palestinians. So Israel, meanwhile, has been shaken by its biggest domestic political crisis in decades, as sustained mass protests have been broken out against a plan to reform the justice system, and spearheaded by the Netanyahu, who continue to battle corruption charges in the court. But Washington never came to rescue this issue, never came to undermine this issue in a better way, and they are never being consolidated this issue in any of the trajectory. So
right.
what we
But
need
are
to do
there
this
some
time around,
initiatives or strategies being adopted by the Arab League for lasting peace in the region when we talk about, of course, this situation in Palestine?
see, as Faisal pointed out very well in this, and he crafted the whole matter in a very well way. So now Russia and China is taking up the very good initiative, and now the whole region must have the whole Arab League must have to have the Russia and China at upfront to create this block in a different way. So otherwise, we cannot fight Washington in any way possible. So Washington or the America is defaulting, and this time around, but still their whole focus is or for the war and the destabilization of this region in the Arab League, in the Russian, in the Ukraine war. And you know that they have, helping Ukraine matter in all way possible. They are giving the weapons, they are giving other things to the against Russia. So Russia and China are taking this initiative in a very better way. So they will. I'm achieving is that the Arab League must have to call up the Russia and the China on the block, so they can settle down all these issues. It is not about the Iran and Israel. It is not about the Syria. It is not about the Jordan. It is not about the Muslim countries. They are against other. So it is just one powerful unipolar word is making us divide, and they are creating the divide and rule formula for us. So they are dividing us. We are not divided in any way possible. We are the Muslim, al-Ikhwan al-Muslim, al-Akhi al-Muslim. Well, Akhi al-Muslim mean we are all brother, and the brotherhood mean that we are on the basis of one unified al-Wahda. So al-Wahda mean that we are unified. So this time around, this message is given to the whole world that we are unified, al-Wahda, al-Wahda, al-Wahda for unity. And that is the most
the message
important
of unity is very significant when we talk about this summit. But when we talk about the history and the role of Arab League, how do you see that the Arab League has advocated for the rights of Palestinian people in the past, and what do you see the future prospects for peace in the region, especially when we talk about Israel-Palestine conflict?
Well, first of all, I mean, if you take a look at all the preceding Arab League summits, there have been a lot of lip service as far as the Israeli-Palestinian, crisis is concerned. And obviously it's an occupation, it's basically state-sponsored apartheid which is taking place. But at the very same time, I think this time it's going to be a bit different because the Arab League do understand that there's a far-right government in Israel. And they basically, I mean, their interior minister is Itamar Ben-Gvir, and he is somebody who's known to exterminate Palestinians whenever he's come about. I mean, the 1993 Cave of Patriarchs massacre, the architect of that massacre, he is somebody who absolutely idolizes him. So he's considered to be a far-right extremist and a bigot. The more Palestinian, you could say, the more Palestinian refugees are going to be exterminated, the more the Arab League would understand that this crisis is different from the previous ones. Obviously, the gravity is pretty much the same, but this time it's more evident that this is state-sponsored. Even the Americans are not backing the Israelis as far as the expansion of settlements are concerned. So this is a very important nuance to take into consideration. If you take a look at the Arab League this time around, it does have a vision. I mean, if you look at the Jeddah Declaration in general, Israel and Palestine are mentioned consistently. And unless and until there's not a workable peace mechanism or workable peace conflict resolution mechanism in place, I don't think the Arab League is going to bow down. One of the reasons why, Mariam, the Arab League has not been able to come up with a more, you could say, pronounced response was because of the Saudi Arabia-Iran divide. Right. That divide has been bridged to a large extent. I mean, consular services would be opened. China's playing a larger role in ensuring that the Arab League does not get divided based upon Washington's doctrine of divide and rule, or dividing the region into camps. So this time around, I feel that a more unified voice, even though Iran is not an Arab state, it's also an important player in the Middle East. Of course. A more unified voice within the GCC and the Arab League could actually take place this time. I mean, this is my analysis because the previous summits have not really yielded anything substantial. This time around, it might be different.
It might be different when we talk about the recently concluded Arab League summit, because after Saudi-Iran rapprochement, we are witnessing a lot of significant changes that are going to be changing and maybe a game changer for the region and beyond. We will be talking more about it, but after a short break. We are talking about the recently concluded Arab League summit and what it means for the region. Mr. Shehryar, when we talk about this important summit, of course, different conflicts in different countries, member states were discussed, and Sudan is one of the countries that was discussed in this summit. How do you overview the recent situation or the developments in Sudan, and how do you see the role of Arab League in future?
So, Mariam, the whole conflict between the Sudanese army and the Rapid Response Force that started like a few months ago.
In April.
In April. So the key significance in that regard from the Arab League is to find a solution that is indigenous. So that's like the most the stress that was like given on this particular issue. So right now, I personally think that the Arab League is reluctant in a way to like see that if international players or international various interests start aligning in Sudan and international players start taking sides, this conflict has the potential to basically move to other nations as well. So that's like I think their way of like preempting this. And Saudi again, like taking the leadership initiative and in support from the US, they brokered a sort of like a ceasefire and like a sort of like way out for Sudanese civilians. So that also like happened last month as well. So right now, I personally think that this conflict will simmer on, but the Arab League would want to play a role in ending this conflict as soon as possible. Before international like powers start like taking sides.
Right, Dr. Sen, when we talk about different countries, of course, situation in Yemen is also significant. We know that Yemen has been grappling with this conflict for years now. How do you see this situation and the prospects of Arab countries in addressing this conflict?
See, as earlier telling the story about the Sudan, it is seriously heart crushing. Hundreds and thousands of the people being killed. And as far as the Yemen is concerned, so the Arab League is reaffirmed the support for all the international and regional effort that aim to reach the political solution to the year-long war. And then a war in Yemen has also killed 10 of the 1,000 of the people and left millions dependent on the international aid. So UN brokered a ceasefire that started in April 2022 has sharply reduced casualties. So the truce expired in the October, but fighting has largely remained on hold. So that is not permanently on hold. So regarding Yemen, the press release urged the support for the stalled peace effort in the country. So reaffirm the international regional effort to reach the political solution to crisis based on the three reference in the Gulf Initiative and the implementation in its mechanism and the Yemeni National Dialogue and the Security Council resolution in 2216. So resolution is stipulated that the Houthis must withdraw from all areas seized during the conflict and relinquish arms seized from the military and security institutions, seize all the action falling exclusively within the authority of legitimate government of Yemen and fully implement the previous Security Council resolution. So the last month, Mohammed Al-Jaber, Saudi Arabia's ambassador to Yemen, arrived to Houthi and held the Sana with the draft text of the peace proposal and addressed the point of the contention between the Yemen government and the Houthis. So most probably this issue will resolve in a very time soon. So that might help this area, and this is the whole purpose of the dedicated Arab League summit, and it will give the impact definitely.
Of course, of course. So it will have an impact on the region as well. When we talk about different conflicts, of course, Lebanon is also a country that has faced various challenges, economic as well as political. How do you see the situation evolving in Lebanon and the role of Arab League in this region?
Well, Lebanon has been witnessing a complete economic meltdown. I mean, it's one country which was regarded as the Switzerland of the East. At this point in time, I think their indicators are just marginally better than Syria's. One of the reasons why is because Lebanon's political system, where you have a Christian who has to be a president, and you also have the prime minister who has to be from a Shia Muslim background, and then you obviously have the head of their parliament who has to be a Sunni. I think what that has done is that it's a very good system in terms of ensuring greater equality amongst the different religious groups within Lebanon, but it has also been able to foment a lot of sectarian strife, not in the form of proxy warfare, but different groups vying for influence. I think Lebanon's stability is anchored in its political stability. We saw the Beirut explosion, which actually took place in 2020, even though many would actually consider it to be an accident, but it's due to pervasive government corruption and neglect that this crisis had to take place. Lebanon is still heavily reliant on international aid as well to try and stimulate their economy. But what makes the Lebanese crisis a bit more different as compared to maybe Syria or Yemen is that there isn't exactly a humanitarian crisis taking place. I mean, you do have a pervasive poverty, you do have poverty levels rising, but you do not have a humanitarian crisis. I think the influx of Palestinian refugees within Lebanon is also having a debilitating impact on its ability to become to increase its GDP growth rates. So what the Arab League can actually do is that it can assist Lebanon as a very important regional player, because we talk about the regional powers, we talk about Saudi Arabia, we talk about the United Arab Emirates. Lebanon, if you take a look at the history of the Arab League summits, has always played a very constructive role in balancing the Iranian Saudi influence, as well as balancing differences between Saudi Arabia and Qatar. If you recall the GCC blockade, a lot of analysts would talk about Kuwait's role in diffusing the crisis, but I think Lebanon has also played a role in ensuring that all the Arab states actually come together. So this time around, Lebanon could be at the receiving end, where Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, given their economic clout, as Mr. Shariat actually mentioned, can actually ensure that Lebanon's financial aid can continue unabated. So that is where the Arab League has a key role to play. But the fact that Lebanon has been mentioned in the Jeddah Declaration shows that there is definitely a crisis which is simmering over there.
Of course, and when we talk about the crisis is also the issue of settlements in these civil war territories as well. And this is of significant concern for the Arab League and Arab nations as well. How do you see that Arab League, what is Arab League going to do about these settlements in these civil war territories?
Well, I think the biggest question of settlements is within the occupied Palestinian territories. We talk about enclaves, we talk about refugees. That is obviously a problem because they put a, you could say, excruciating impact on the domestic economies. There's absolutely no doubt about it. But halting settlements which are illegal under international law, there are violation of numerous UN Security Council resolutions, and they're also considered to be a product of state-sponsored apartheid from the Israeli government. And the fact that even the Americans are now voicing concern that most of the settlements which are actually taking place, there needs to be a halt towards that. There's a disagreement between the judiciary, the Supreme Court of Israel, as well as the Knesset on how to go about the settlements. You had an order which was passed by the government to try and sanction it, and the Supreme Court is being bulldozed to a large extent, and that is why protests are taking place within Israel. This is an opportunity for the Arab League to try and make sure that they, in the absence of American interference, can take up the settlement issue with all the all the United Nations forums and related to international law. They've tried it previously, but this time the environment is more conducive to do that, because they do believe that any external American interference would hijack any peace proposal. So that is where settlements have to be targeted systematically towards condemning Israel, stopping settlements in places like Sheikh Jarrah, where there's proliferation taking place. Palestinians are being evicted from their homes. There are also reports, Mariam, of Palestinian houses being burnt as well by Israeli settlers. That has to stop. So that is where the Arab League can play a pretty significant role.
Mr. Shayar, Mr. Hamza is mentioning that the environment is now conducive for resolving this issue. But we see that this has always remained an issue of contention when we talk about different segments. Do you see some challenges when we talk about these civil territories that are, that is of significant importance to the Arab League?
So there are various concerns that are on the way to peaceful resolution. As Hamza previously mentioned, and I agree with him, that a unified, cohesive policy in the Middle East was previously not possible because of the conflict or the friction between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And due to that significant event in which Iran and Saudi are now coming to a peaceful resolution of most of their issues. Now I think that there will be a more cohesive and a unified policy on various conflicts that have been simmering in this region for a very long time. One of the key significant areas that would be of concern to the whole of the Arab League is the influx of refugees from these conflict-ridden areas, especially Syria. I personally don't think, and I agree with Hamza, it's very difficult for countries like Lebanon, Jordan to host such a large number of refugees that are coming because of the issues. Again, like we talked about Sudan, 220,000 refugees have already flowed into other countries. Over 800,000 people have been displaced. So this is like not good for regional integration, regional stability, regional economic integration that GCC led by the Saudi Arabia is envisioning in the Middle East. And now if these issues and these conflicts can be resolved, we can move more towards like integrating this region, and that would like make Arab League more of a force if it's like economically and regionally able to integrate these regions.
Of course, and when we talk about regional integration, of course, we know that economic prosperity is very important and economic integration is very important. Dr. Stan, when we talk about the concept of Arab Common Market, how do you see this concept in the backdrop of Arab League Summit, and do you see some future economic integration among the Arab states, keeping in mind the conflicts that are going on in the region?
See, this is very much important that as they are talking about the free trade agreement, even one of the outcome of the summit that Arab people aspired to the weight of the activation of the Arab Common Market and Greater Arab Free Trade Agreement to unify custom tariffs. And then is the next, I'm just reading it out, in the addition to the digital economy and green economy. They are working on the digital economy and the green economy, and then other converted outcomes, including the implementation of the Sustainable Development Plan and continuation. So to process the economic and social development on the various levels, so they are working on the, as I told you earlier, that the Arab Space Corporation, which is very much important, sustainability of Arab agriculture development. Then yes, of course, without Russia and China, won't be possible. Then is the improvement in the production of reservation of the natural resources, sustainable Arab pastures, and raising the rates of the percentage of the anti-Arab trade. So one of the most urgent issues on the concern Arab in the water source management, and they are making the new territory and a new preferential trade agreement between the water scarcity and other thing. OPEC and OPEC plus, you know that you have the complete idea of the OPEC and OPEC plus. When Arab has decided their own fate, their own rates, their own free trades and their trade agreements, along with the Russia and China holding the bigger powers and bigger trade powers, bigger economic powers, then the only unipolar power, America cannot use us in the way they previously use us. And you know about the dollar mechanism. So they are defaulting just because they use the Saudis, they use the whole of the African nations' oil, they use the whole of the Arab nations' oil. They destroyed Lebanon just for their sake of the petrodollar. And now the petrodollar is declining like anything. And you know that the 40 countries is using the RMB, or what we call it, yuan swapping. So the most powerful currency would be the euro. And I'm telling you, there is not even the scope of the Eurozone or the Eurasian dollar or the euros. And a dollar is declining like anything. And next trade unicorn would be the RMB or the yuan.
Right, but when we talk about the future prospects of this Arab Common Market, how do you see what are the barriers and how to address these barriers for larger economic integration of the region?
So, Mariam, instability. Western power wants instability in the Arab League. Wherever the instability there, their whole common market cannot work. So OPEC plus or OPEC is the ultimate threat to them, and they wanted to intervene in the African market. They want to get the hold of out of whole resource, even it is the metal, if it is the gold, if it is the oil resources. They wanted to scatter our market. So Arab is designing their whole market accordingly. So now the market is designed as per the Russia, as per the China, and the regional power. So of course the Malaysia, the other powers, the Pakistan, and if and the only matter is Afghanistan. I'm telling you, the bone of contention is Afghanistan. If we cannot remove or if we cannot resolve the issue of Afghanistan, they will continuously cripping us, and it is a bone of contention. And mark my words, if we cannot resolve the issue of Afghanistan, they cannot settle down the issue in the Iran and Saudi too. So we
Right.
have, and the terrorizing factor and the weaponry supply chain must be cut down from the America to the Ukraine at the earliest, because they are being caught red-handedly. They are providing the best of the best weapon
Right.
there in this region. So they want a destruction in this block. So we have to be very careful, and this Jeddah Declaration will give us the solution how to be very positively and proactively and economically and based on the economic pivot, how can we be the power of on the basis of economy?
Of course. Mr. Hamza, when we talk about, of course, this important summit, one of the main objectives was to promote cooperation and dialogue amongst the member states. How do you see the future of this Arab summit, and how do you see the decisions made in this summit are going to be implemented for the larger good of the Arab states?
I think, first of all, I'm very optimistic about dialogue between all the countries, because previously in the 2017 case, if you take a look at Qatar's blockade by the GCC, that prevented the channel of communication between Hamad bin Khalifa as well as the Saudi king, for that matter. This time around it's a bit different because of the very fact that many Arab states are open to this entire prospect of ironing out differences. Instead of going for military intervention, as has been the case with Saudi Arabia's military intervention in Yemen, they're looking forward to the prospect of peace talks. In the Yemen case, the Southern Transitional Council is being backed by the United Arab Emirates. Saudi Arabia actually wants, a pro-Saudi regime within Yemen, and Iran has conflicting opinions on how stability can return to Yemen because it sponsors Houthi rebels. This time around, if both or these two Arab states, along with Iran, because of the fact that Saudi Arabia and Iran have resumed diplomatic relations, can sit down and have a trilateral dialogue to try and resolve the Yemen crisis, that is definitely possible. And Lebanon, I mentioned in my previous remarks how that would also be possible as well. Syria, it's important to ensure that credit lines are issued to a large extent. In South Asia, we have the example of Sri Lanka, which witnessed an economic meltdown. India provided a credit line to the Sri Lankans. The Chinese have done it as well. So why can't it happen in the Arab world for Lebanon? Because it is financially starved. I mean, ATM machines in Lebanon do not work. The banking crisis is extremely horrendous. It's not as bad as what it is in Afghanistan. But it is pretty bad in that regard. So that is where the Arab states can actually come together and negotiate and ensure that. The second part of your question is regarding the success of it. It really depends, Mariam, because once the dialogue is initiated, joint statements take place. I mean, it cannot be based on mere semantics. They have to be implemented in letter and spirit. What sort of mechanisms these Arab states work towards, what sort of, you could say, blueprints they actually work towards, that would determine the success of it. Because if, for example, in Lebanon's case, if all these regional powers actually do take place, and Lebanon's economy actually gets out of the nose-diving trend that it is witnessing, then that can be considered to be progress to a large extent.
Of course, and when we talk about progress, of course, this summit also discussed about the sustainable development in the region as well. So how do you see that the steps, or what steps needs to be taken by this Arab League summit or the Arab states for the larger good of people as well, because we are witnessing a humanitarian crisis going on in the region?
So Mariam, I see a significant realignment in the Middle East now emerging from this very special meeting. And now this realignment, the whole concept of the Arab common market is central to the whole discussion on economic integration and regional cooperation. And taking the example of Pakistan and this region, when we talk about CPEC and regional integration, we know that as long as there are conflicts present, the whole dream of regional integration and making a common market is always a challenge. So the Arab League, I think now is realizing that, and the move towards resolving all of these simmering conflicts through dialogue and cooperation and regional integration, they can only happen, and that can basically take the whole region forward in terms of more economic opportunities for the people who are suffering in Syria, in Lebanon. Jordan, we don't talk about the conflict or the economic hardships that Jordan is going through. The only way forward is to resolve these conflicts, and then the GCC and the Middle Eastern countries can play a much larger role in developing these common markets and resolving tariff-related issues, custom-related issues, free flow of manpower, labor, talking about digital economies and the green economies, they are not possible once since these conflicts are there.
Of course. Thank you very much, Mr. Shahryar Khan, for joining in today's program. Thank you very much, Mr. Hamza Rafat, for joining in today's program. Thank you very much, Dr. Sanj Javed, for joining us in today's program. Of course, in today's program, we discussed about the important and significant and historic Arab League summit that was concluded in Jeddah recently. And of course, we know that leaders from across the Arab world gathered together to discuss different issues. Palestine-Israel issue was discussed, as well as Lebanon, situation in Syria, and other conflict-ridden areas were also discussed. And the decisions, if implemented in letter and spirit, have the potential for having a far-reaching impact, not only for the region, but beyond as well. That's all from Game Changer tonight. Take care.